Hello, and welcome to this eSchool News webcast. My name is Andrew Barber, and I'm a senior contributing editor here at eSchool News, and I'll be acting as the moderator for today's webinar, which is sponsored by Extreme Networks. And over the next hour, we're going to discuss the federal ERate program, and more specifically, we're going to take a look at practical issues like making the most of your budget and what kind of equipment qualifies for Category 2 funding. Before we get started, though, I do want to take a few moments to highlight a couple of items about the console we're using today. First, we are recording the event, and in a couple of days, we'll send out an email to everyone who registered with a link, with an email that contains a link to the recorded event, and you'll also be able to download a PDF of the slides from that same email. And second, please ask questions. Don't feel as if you have to wait until the end. At any point during the presentation, if you have a question, just type it into the Q&A panel and hit the submit button. And I think we're probably going to have about 15 minutes or so at the end when our speakers can address your questions. We also have a chat function, which if you look down at the bottom of your screen to the black toolbar, there's a blue group chat icon down there. Use chat to talk among yourselves or to contact me or the eSchool News team if you have technical issues or any other problems. But I do have one favor to ask you. Please don't use the chat to ask our panelists questions. They're simply not going to have time to monitor the chat. So if you have a question for them, please use the Q&A panel instead. And with that out of the way, let me introduce you to our guest today. John Harrington is the CEO of Funds for Learning. It's a consulting firm that specializes in the ERate funding program. And John has been helping schools and libraries receive ERate discounts for more than 20 years. And in fact, he and his team have prepared some 14,000 applications totaling more than $1.7 billion. And as you can see from that first slide, our first speaker was supposed to be Jonathan Kidwell from Extreme Networks, but unfortunately he is not able to make it. However, he is more than ably replaced by Bob Nilsson, Director of Vertical Solutions Marketing at Extreme Networks. And Bob has more than 30 years experience in marketing IT systems to global 1,000 companies worldwide. And before joining Extreme Networks, Bob served as the VP of Marketing at Clear Methods, a web services company. Welcome, Bob. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you, Andrew. And just a quick word as we get started about Extreme Networks and what we do. We are a network infrastructure and software vendor with a product line that covers the full range of network products, from data center switches to wired edge, Wi-Fi access points, and network management and analytics. We're proud to announce we've been awarded numerous Reader's Choice Prizes, including THE Journal for Favorite Wireless Access Point and Favorite Network or Wi-Fi Management Analysis and Monitoring Tool. And we're also, once again this year, the official Wi-Fi provider of the NFL, as well as official Wi-Fi analytics provider of the Super Bowl. Just this summer, Gartner announced that Extreme Networks is positioned as a leader in their 2018 Magic Quadrant for wired and wireless LAN access infrastructure. And as you can see there on the left, Gartner has given Extreme Networks a 5-star rating for service and support, #1 in the category, and that's based on customer feedback. At Extreme, education is indeed our largest market. We have some of the largest districts in the U.S., like West Palm Beach. But I'd like to point out that those large districts with tens of thousands of students use the very same technology as smaller school districts with 250 students. Technologies we provide are not tiered on how big you are or how much money you have. And our networks bring major benefits to the classroom regardless of the size of your district. Before I turn it over to John, we'd just like everyone to answer this quick poll question, give us a feel for what your plans are with Category 2 funding. So as you see on the screen, the question is, are you planning to file for Category 2 funds in 2019? and we're looking for yes or no, we've used them all up, or no, we don't intend to file, or you're still thinking about it, undecided. So I'll give you, give everyone just a minute to answer that. We'll see the results. If you could check on an answer there. Okay, now let's see the results. So it looks like in the audience, yes has almost 60%. No one has used up all their funds yet. Some don't intend to, but the rest are undecided. Okay, great. So now let me turn it over to John Harrington. Go ahead, John, it's all yours.
Thank you, Bob, and big thank you to eSchool News and to Extreme Networks for putting this event together. You know, Andrew mentioned that I've been involved with ERate application work at Funds for Learning. It's all we do, actually, for the last 21 years. And you know, there's a lot that goes into a successful ERate application. The most important factor is education. It's rather ironic, given the fact that we're talking about K through 12 education, but really the difference in being an effective ERate applicant, getting funds committed, funds utilized, oftentimes simply comes down to education. And events like this are an important part, making sure that as applicants, you are well equipped, well prepared for what lies ahead in this next funding year. And so that will be really the focus of today's presentation. We'll be looking towards the 2019 application cycle, giving you an update on where things stand and what changes we anticipate, what changes we don't anticipate. And along the way, as has already been stated, feel free to ask questions. It is really for you that we are here today, and feel free to ask whatever questions you might have. As I mentioned, we'll be talking about what's changing and not changing. I'll also give a quick refresher today on Category 1 and Category 2 discounts. What are those? What is the basic framework for eligible services under the ERate program? For those of you who are newer to the program, perhaps you're just inheriting a file folder at your school district, and now you're trying to navigate this whole ERate process. We'll give you a quick refresher on what qualifies for discounts. And then I'm going to look a little more closely at Category 1 discounts for modulating electronics. That's for wide area networks. And then Category 2 budgets, says 2 budgets there. It's Category 2 budgets, and then planning your Category 2 funding requests. Looks like about 60% of you are intending to apply for Category 2 funds this year, and another 40% sort of on the fence. So we'll really talk about how you plan for the effective utilization of those Category 2 discounts. And then last but not least, I'm going to leave you with some tips for planning your application in the EPC system. That's the USAC online portal. Let's talk about what's changing and what's not changing in 2019. And I will give you a full disclaimer. This is very much crystal ball sort of information I'm providing you. These are my impressions. These are my best professional guesses in some cases, but I want to give you a feel for what we think is changing and not changing. One positive change this year is the USAC in-person trainings. We are now, today is the Sacramento training, and I've attended training, and we've had Funds for Learning staff at all the trainings so far, and they've been a big improvement over last year's training. So if any of you went to that training last year, you'll know it just sort of fell flat, and the new leadership at USAC, the new CEO, Rada Seeker, and then the acting vice president, Catriona Ayer, have really done a good job this year of kind of infusing new life into the in-person training. So that's an encouraging step. Now, on its own, what does that mean? Why does it even matter? Obviously, it's good to get good training, but I think for me, it also sets the tone or a potential direction for other improvements that may be longer coming in the program, the sort of institutional reforms and system changes that take months and months. You don't necessarily see those happening right away, but when you see effective change coming from the top of the organization, it's a good indicator that there may be other changes coming down the road. Also, changing is the PIA subcontractor. Now, PIA stands for Program Integrity Assurance. These are the individuals that actually review applications each year. There are 35,000 applications submitted, and USAC, the program administrator, does not themselves go through those applications. It's a subcontractor, and since the beginning of time, basically, the beginning of the ERate time, and back in 1998, first funding year, a group called Solix out of Whippany, New Jersey, has managed that process. And that is now changing at the end of this year. There will be a transition to a new subcontractor that's located right in the Washington, D.C. area. It's a group called Maximus. This is really inside baseball stuff, talking about who USAC uses as a subcontractor. It again may seem like something that is in the weeds, and why does it matter? Well, it has a huge impact on all of our lives, because that is actually the group that manages the applications, that is responsible for getting those funding commitments out the door. They're really the front lines of how this program is administered. And that change will impact all applicants this year. It's important going into the next funding year to understand that. Now, assuming that this is a fantastic change, that there will be a great contractor, that they'll administer application reviews very well, giving this the very best optimistic viewpoint, it will still represent a significant change. And so just the fact that USAC is changing out contractors most likely will lead to some challenges in terms of the application work itself, which really just underscores the importance of preparing applications well, having good documentation, getting applications submitted as early as possible in the filing window. Another change that some of you may have noticed has to do with funding commitment adjustments. After the fact changes by USAC to funding commitments. We recently ran an article actually on our website at fundsforlearning.com about the significant uptick we've seen in commitment adjustments, where USAC comes after the fact and reduces funding commitments, for example. There are also other types of changes that are just sort of happening in the system. In many cases now, these changes are USAC driven. So USAC is actually sort of going in and filing a kind of a phantom appeal on your behalf and making changes to your funding commitments. And this is a relatively new phenomena, at least to the extent that we're seeing it now. And it's just another area that you need to be aware of, that you need to keep your eyes not only on what's pending, what you have in the queue at USAC, but even your current funding commitments, just staying on top of, keeping your finger on the pulse of those funding commitments, because there are changes now taking place, whereas in the past those things seemed more static. Remember that voice services are now completely phased out, so your telephone service or purchasing any type of telephone equipment, that is no longer an aspect of the program. And also, last but not least, we know that in the Category 2 budget system itself is up for a change in 2020. The original reform that was implemented back in 2014 stipulated that the Category 2 budget system was coming into effect from the period 2015 through 2019. And then after that, there will be some change. And I'll talk about that a bit more as we get into the presentation. Not changing the eligible services list, the types of goods and the types of goods and services that qualify for ERate discounts. Those are not expected to change at all for 2019. The official list has not yet been published, but we don't anticipate any significant changes there. Also, the EPC system itself, the portal in which you submit the Form 470 or Form 471 forms, that has been a source of much frustration, many headaches. The good news and the bad news is it's not really changing this year. So we sort of know what to expect, and you can go in there and pretty much you're going to have to navigate it the same way that you have. But hopefully, if you've done it before, you now know kind of the secret codes and the combination of clicks that will get you your form submitted. But that really isn't expected to change. And as I mentioned, the Category 2 budget system for 2019 is not expected to change either. Okay, so we'll move along, and let's talk about the sort of where things stand today. Funding year snapshots. If you have been doing this at any amount of time, you know that at any given moment you actually have multiple funding years that you are managing. The 2017 funding year has ended, and there is payment paperwork that is necessary. You either had a deadline on Monday that hopefully you met, or there may be another big deadline looming for many of you in January. Either way, it is important that you maintain a close eye on those deadlines, and you don't want to miss out on the deadline for submitting payment paperwork after you've done all the other work of getting a funding commitment. Of course, we are in the 2018 funding year right now, July 1st, 2018 through June 30th of 2019. Make sure that you have submitted your Form 486 to indicate that services have started. You can also begin processing your payment paperwork. Some applicants, especially those that are seeking reimbursements, will wait until the funding year is over and then submit that reimbursement paperwork. And I would encourage you to consider what I believe is the best practice, and that is to submit monthly or quarterly reimbursement forms. Rather than waiting to the end, pushing up against those payment paperwork deadlines, go ahead and just start submitting those reimbursement requests now as you go along through the 2018 funding year. And then, of course, 2019, which is really our focus today. The competitive bidding process is now open for that. The Form 470s, recall, that is the form that notifies vendors that you are in the market for certain goods and services. Those are now being posted on the USAC site via EPC. There have been no formal dates yet set for the Form 471 funding request window. We expect that it will be January through March, very similar to what it was last year. The USAC board actually just last week memorialized that the window would close no earlier than March 20th. So we know that the filing window could close March 20th. It could also be later than that. But for your own planning purposes, I would assume a March close to the filing window. And if that's the case, you should then begin working backwards from that date, understanding that you have to prepare an application and get it submitted in EPC, which can take, say, 2 weeks. You also need to get a contract signed. In many cases, that requires board approval. So you'll need to sort of look at the board meeting schedule for the end of January, the beginning of the beginning of February. And that really puts you back into a time frame that would suggest that you should go ahead and get your Form 470 and your RFP published really as soon as possible in order to give yourself the breathing room that you need. Ideally, if you can submit your funding application in January or February, you stand a much more, you have much better odds of getting an earlier funding commitment, a funding commitment in the first funding wave next year if you get that application in sooner. One other thing to remember is that we're seeing a big uptick in appeals. Remember I mentioned that there are more adjustments being made to funding commitments. There are also, because of EPC as well as the FCC's regulations related to invoicing, a lot of kind of gotcha moments in the invoicing payment process. Across the board, I would say leave yourself extra time, an extra margin of error for all of the forms, all the paperwork that you're submitting in order to make sure that if you submit something and it's denied, you have time to submit it again without having to ask for some type of waiver. Okay, what is Category 1 and Category 2? There are two, we can go ahead and advance the slides there. There are two categories of connectivity funding commitments in the ERate program. Category 1 refers to connections to a school or a library facility. It is all of the data lines, the internet access, the services that really connect your facilities to other facilities or to the world in general. The Category 1 system really refers in most cases to leased networks, services that you pay for on a monthly basis. It does now include also the purchase of wide area networks, fiber optic networks, or so-called self-provision networks. That is an area that has been fraught with frustration for many applicants. Those requests are sort of notoriously slow in being approved. The other major category, or Category 2 requests, Category 2 refers to the on-campus connections that are made within a school building or a library building. These are the local area network devices, the routers, the switches, the wireless access points, a lot of the good stuff that you heard Bob talking about that Extreme provides. It's those types of nuts and bolts infrastructure that are driving the network. Those qualify for Category 2 discounts. Also, the physical infrastructure, the data cabling, the conduits, the racks that hold equipment, pretty much anything that is necessary on campus to provide that connection, to bring wireless access to a classroom will qualify for discounts under the Category 2 system. Okay, let's talk now about Category 1 modulating electronics. Now that sentence, it may sound like a little confusing or overwhelming. It's really not too bad. And the reason I wanted to point it out today is it's an area that I believe is a bit underserved in the ERate applicant community. Beginning for the first time in 2016, the FCC, as I mentioned, now allows applicants to purchase their own wide area networks. And as a part of that, the FCC opened the door for modulating electronics, the devices that power those networks. So if you've got two facilities connected by a fiber optic cable, there are network electronics on either end of that cable that that allow that communication to take place. And those now qualify for purchase under the Category 1 designation. And that's important for two reasons. Number one is the Category 1 equipment receives a higher discount. It receives the highest discount, in fact, 90%. And it's also exempt from the Category 2 budget cap system that we're going to talk about. So if you have a self-provision network, or if you are leasing a dark fiber network, and that means you're leasing that fiber network and you are putting your own electronics on either end of that, you should really consider and look at the Category 1 network electronics modulating equipment because, again, you can get a discount of up to 90% on that equipment, and it will be exempt from the Category 2 budget system itself. And this graphic sort of illustrates what we're talking about here. You've got your wide area network coming into a school building, and those electronics that connect to that network, which oftentimes are pricier than just your typical switch that you might have in a networking closet. All of that will qualify as long as it is required for the transmission of that data across your wide area network, and that it's related to either that leased dark fiber or your own self-provisioned network. And it's important to note that your local area network must function separate and apart from that equipment in order to qualify for the Category 1 discount. Otherwise, it becomes part of Category 2, which is what we're going to talk about next. So Category 2 budgets. When the FCC reformed the ERate program back again in 2014, they created a budget system. This would empower all applicants to receive discounts for on-campus infrastructure. For many years, there had been no funding available for on-campus networks, and the FCC recognized how important it was to make sure that on campus there were Wi-Fi signals, on campus there were data jacks that students and teachers could connect to get to the outside world. So they created this Category 2 budget system. Every site in your school district or in a library system has a funding cap or budget associated with it. And it is a 5-year cap. It's available between 2015 to 2019 for that site. And it is calculated based on the enrollment of the facility. So you can take the number of students at a site, multiply it by a certain factor. We'll estimate it about $158 in 2019. It hasn't actually been set yet. It's tied to inflation and some other factors, but around $158 per student is a good working number you could use for the 2019. Multiply the enrollment times 158, then times your district-wide average, and that will give you the maximum amount of funding that's available at a particular site for Category 2 discounts. If you have not used your budget at a particular site, you should know that after 2019, the old rules, which is something called the 2 out of 5 rule, will kick back in, will become sort of the law of the land again, unless the FCC takes other action. There are, you can see, 75,830 sites today that have an estimated budget of $40,562 available. So what you'll need to do, if you don't yet have it today, you should make sure you have a good understanding of what the Category 2 site balances are in your school district. Again, if 60% of the attendees today are planning to prepare a Category 2 application, then you'll want to make sure that you can account for each of your sites, understanding how much money is available. Again, in this example, the average budget of $40,000, that would be a site that maybe it hasn't used any of its funds yet, or it could be that there was a project at a site in 2016, it used up some of the funds that were available, but there is a remaining balance. So you'll just want to make sure that you're really clear on how much money is available at each site. And I'm sure there's going to be some more questions about that, so I'll sort of continue on here, and then we'll get to the Q&A. The Category 2 of the Form 471 is important to understand the basic structure of it, because it really drives a lot of the process itself. When you are submitting your ERate application, you'll have one application. It's called the Form 471 application. It'll have multiple funding requests on that form, and then each funding request will have a specific line item or line items on it, and those are where you spell out the details, the specifics of your purchases. So when we're talking about Category 2 discounts, you'll have a school site that has, let's say, again, a $40,000 budget. You post a Form 470, you get bids for a networking project. You evaluate those bids. You choose one of the vendors based on your evaluation matrix, with the price being the highest weighted factor. You sign an agreement, and now you're ready to submit an application. You'll take that bill of goods, a bill of materials that was provided to you as a part of that proposal. And let's say, again, you've got that site, and you're buying switches, you're buying wireless access points, you have some data cabling. Each of the line items that were quoted to you will be listed on that Form 471 application. So you'll need to be able to identify for each school site what hardware is being purchased, what quantity, the specific models, makes and models, quantities, and so on that are being that you hope to deploy into your school system in the next funding year. USAC, when they receive all the applications, they want to look at all of that information. So it's very important that all of these pieces line up. Your Form 470, remember that's the competitive bidding document, it needs to list out in general terms what it is you hope to purchase. Wireless access points. We're looking for switches. It doesn't have to be, and in fact cannot be just as, we're only looking for this particular type of device or this particular model number, but it needs to be generally specific that you can demonstrate this is indeed what you were in the market to purchase. On your Form 471, USAC will really want to see all of that detail line up between your application and the quote or the contract that you have with your vendor. And if something doesn't match later, then you'll have to do a Form 500 and perform what is called a service substitution to make those line items match up. USAC will not pay for goods or services that do not appear on the line items associated with a funding request. So you've really got to get that in there correctly, and the best time to do it is right there at the Form 471 stage, which means when you're going out to bid, you need to be asking for those sorts of specifics. So if you are preparing an RFP right now for network electronics, you should ask that the respondents provide you with a detailed bill of materials so that you have all of the specifics that you will need in order to successfully prepare your Form 471. Ultimately, we think the payment system, USAC, their ideal is that the payment system ties back to all of these individual line items so that it all goes directly really from the competitive bid to the application to whatever was specifically installed to the invoice in the payment phase. All right, I want to talk a little bit now about preparing your application in EPC, and because it's you can bid everything out correctly, you can contract properly and properly evaluate your proposals. If you can't get it into the EPC system, you can't get the application submitted on time or properly, then this whole process was sort of for nothing. Right now, we are in an administrative window. This is your opportunity to update the information in the USAC system, letting them know about your school sites, letting them know the names, the demographics associated with those sites. For example, the enrollment, the percentage of students that qualify for free and reduced price lunch. All that information is being loaded into the USAC system right now. That admin window, as they call it, will close sometime right before the filing window opens. So really in your mind, you could think that you have the month of November and the month of December to update information in the EPC system. I can tell you, based on our own experience in previous years, the closer you get to the close of the administrative window, the harder it can be to make changes. For example, you may have a new site that's going to be opening next year, and you need that site listed on your ERate application. You have to actually reach out to USAC and provide them that information, and they will get you what is referred to as a build entity number for that site. This is not an automated process. So this isn't something that you can just kind of log in and create on your own. It's a manual process. USAC has to update it themselves based on information that they provide you. And the closer you get to the end of that administrative window, the more people are all calling in to make those changes, and the slower the response times get. So I would not wait until the end of the admin window to make those changes. In fact, if you can have all of that work done in the month of November, it would be fantastic. You should have final enrollment data now from your state, or if not, it should be very soon that you have that, so you can load the most accurate information into your profile and get that piece of the process taken care of. A couple of best practices I want to just share with you related to this. Start with just sitting down and making your own site list. You know, I would pull up from whatever system in your own school district you have there, really these are our sites, here are the addresses, and make that list and all that information, and then compare that with what's in the USAC system now. A quick note, for each site they will ask for a phone number and an email address. Those can be the same. It can be you know, a central phone number, a central email address. There doesn't have to be a unique phone number or email address for each site, but it will ask you for that. Also, it will ask for the NCS codes if available, and that's good to put those in there. But really, the site name, its physical address, the enrollment, and the NSLP eligibility. Also, don't forget to include your non-instructional facilities. If you have facilities that benefit from some of those shared Category 1 services, your internet access, for example, your wide area network, those will need to be listed in your profile in order to be listed on your application in order to then receive discounted services. So don't overlook those non-instructional facilities. If you have a site in your school district that is getting some type of service to it, then it needs to have a build entity number. And so just, again, make it a habit each year to go through and review that list. And you know, because of the nature of these changes, you know, new non-instructional facilities open up, schools close, new buildings or buildings move. You know, that all of those various factors that you have to manage. Do your best to get the most updated list, especially accounting for, you know, all of the sites that are receiving service in your school district. Just to give you a little bit more information about that profile itself, as I mentioned, each site has a build entity number, and those build entities all associate to a main primary parent build entity. So the parent build entity would be your school district, and then each individual school site or non-instructional facility would be a child bin, as they're referred to, underneath that parent bin. And USAC will want to make sure that in their system they have an accurate list of all of the child bins under a parent bin. And that can be a little tricky sometimes if there are sites that maybe are shared between different ERate applicants. So there are some issues. So don't assume, just don't assume anything when you're looking at your profile. Go in and do your best to make sure that it's accurate. And as I said there, you'll most likely need to reach out to USAC to add, remove bins, change bins, get things corrected. But it's very, very important, because once that window closes, those sites will be the sites that are listed on your funding application. And although that application may not be submitted until February or March, one of the most fundamental parts, and one of the things you won't be able to change later, is taking place right now associated with these bins. So review all the sites that you have, making note of any old or closed build entities, and you'll have a much better outcome when you submit your application in the spring of 2019, if you get that profile accurately updated now. I also want to make a quick note about RFPs. Remember, RFPs themselves are not an ERate requirement, but for you, they may be. The ERate program always starts with the state and local competitive bidding rules, and then layers on top of that the other ERate rules themselves, such as the Form 470, the 28-day waiting period, and so on. An RFP itself does not have to be very long or complicated. For purposes of the ERate program, if you do not have to submit an RFP, they will sort of consider your Form 470 and RFP, and if you provide other information, other details to vendors, then they will consider that part of the RFP, and they'll want to see that actually uploaded into the EPC system. We've seen many cases where other data, other information, other background insights are provided to vendors, and if that's not uploaded into EPC, USAC will consider that a violation. They will claim that that information was not available to all potential vendors, and you're likely to be denied funding. So make sure that you've got your RFPs and any documents really associated with communicating to vendors about your needs loaded into the EPC system. So a quick summary of the 2019 funding year. We expect that there will be some hiccups when this change takes place between the subcontractors that manage the applications. And if you've done the ERate for a while, you know it's not a perfect process, and you know you've probably managed to survive this long, and you'll survive this as well. But just know that it's likely that there will be some challenges, some hiccups associated with this transition of the application reviewers. And again, the ongoing EPC challenges, it's just a difficult system to work with. Getting sites associated correctly with your own sites, getting the correct personnel in your school district assigned access to within EPC to your files, or if you use a third-party consultant, getting the correct individuals associated with your school district. All these things take time. They take a phone call to USAC. It's not something that happens manually, and it just adds time and frustration. And certainly, as it relates to Category 2 budgets, you should really look at your sites, make sure that you have a good understanding of what the Category 2 budgets for each of your locations, and consider what upgrades might be necessary. The second to the last point here is a very important one. It should probably be in a bigger font. Remember that your planning window for Category 2 budgets today is through September of 2020. The ERate funding year 2019 for Category 2 discounts starts July 1st, 2019, but extends through September 30th of 2020. So you can, on the application that you submit in February or March, plan for requests of equipment, network upgrades that will take place in 2020, particularly given the uncertainties related to the 2020 funding year and the fact that we don't know yet what Category 2 discounts will look like, or if they'll even exist in their current form. It's very important to leverage this opportunity, take advantage of kind of the bird in the hand, what we know exists today, the 2019 funding year, the availability of Category 2 discounts, and you can stretch that 2019 year all the way out to September 2020. And that's the question I would leave all of you with, is where do you think your sites should be in September 2020? And to the extent that you have sites that have Category 2 budgets remaining, and there is some delta, some difference between where they are today and where you want them to be 2 years from now, then you should really consider that for your 2019 Form 470 and your 2019 Form 471 funding requests. With that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Bob, and then I'm going to take a look at some of these questions that have come in so we can talk about those.
Okay, John, thanks. Great job. Just to remind everyone, Funds for Learning is available to provide consulting and support services for ERate program participants. And we at Extreme Networks have posted our ERate Resource Center that can also be of assistance. That ERate Resource Center is available at extremenetworks.com/e-rate-resource-center. And some of the resources in there include our ERate program guide, on-demand webinars like this one, which we will post there within a day or so. It also has links to more resources, such as the USAC blog that's got the latest breaking ERate news and changes. We have a guide to E-rate terminology, and we've got the 7 E-rate myths that may be costing you money. So with that, let me turn it back to Andrew and open it up to start addressing the questions on there.
All right. Well, thanks, Bob, and thank you, John, for a really informative presentation. We have 15 minutes left, which is perfect, and we do have a lot of questions that have come in from the audience. So let's see how many we can get through before we run out of time. And the first question, John, that I'd ask you is from Miguel, who said that he's heard that C1 funding will eventually be phased out, and he wants to know, is there any truth in this?
No, it's you know, of course, anything can happen in Washington D.C. these days, but I would not expect that to happen. The E-rate program is one of those unique animals in D.C. that enjoys truly bipartisan support and is not even at all really a political football. And one of the reasons for that, or maybe probably the biggest reason for that, is the fact that it is not part of the federal budget. So we all pay into the Universal Service Fund through our phone bills, our cell phone bills, and because of that, the dollars can't be used to balance the budget or shift priorities. It's insulated from all of that, and the FCC has had a very clear mission to bring connections, you know, into the classroom since the beginning of this program. And most of the debates are about how it functions, but not should there be support for these types of goods and services. So the biggest debate in my mind would be if they would bring support back for voice services. There doesn't seem to be a real appetite for that, so I don't expect that to happen. But in terms of any of the current eligible services list, we don't see any changes to that at any time whatsoever. It seems very steady, the support.
Nope.
Plenty of other things to worry about, but that's not one of them.
All right. I have two questions that seem to be related, and Dawn was wanting to know whether the balances that are showing in EPC are accurate. And I have someone else who wanted to know about Category 2 funds who said that they're seeing different balances showing on the EPC side and on the USAC side for Category 2 funds. Can you talk about whether these inconsistencies?
Yes, the inconsistencies are truly inconsistent. So don't be surprised. I mentioned make sure you know what your budget is. What I didn't mention was that it's a bit difficult to do that. What you need to do is for each site, look at all of your funding commitments, 2015 through 2018, and subtract that from your estimated 2019 budget. Now it's easier said than done. In fact, I will just extend to you that any of you that would like, you are welcome to just reach out to me directly. It's jharrington@fundsforlearning.com, or you can email help@fundsforlearning.com. Just mention that you need your Category 2 budget balance, and we can try to pull that. And how we do that is we actually sort of pull down deep into the various databases and calculate it ourselves. The EPC balance that was mentioned does not include, it only reflects those applications that were prepared in EPC. So the first year, you might recall the 2015 funding year, they used a different system. That's not reflected in those numbers. So just sort of like everything else in this program, it's not quite as easy as you'd expect it to be. But so you need to either calculate that yourself, or really, I'm happy to help us help you get that information.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you. I'm going to shift to a question that came in from Cheryl, who said that they have a 2016 and 2017 request which were approved, but no funding has occurred. Is it too late at this point to get those funds?
No. What you need to do, Cheryl, and anyone else that has commitments they've not utilized, the budgets are based off of commitments, not utilization. what you'll want to do is cancel those funding commitments. And you can do that via Form 500. As long as you cancel those funding commitments, then those dollars will come back into your budget. So if you've got a funding commitment in any of those prior years, 2015 through 2018, that you're not using, or if you've partially used, let's say you used half of it, you can submit a Form 500 to reduce the funding commitment amount. You really want to zero out those balances and make sure that the commitments line up with the dispersed amounts so that you get the full benefit of your Category 2 budget in 2019. But you'll want to either remove those funding commitments or reduce them to the level of what you spent to give yourself the maximum C2 budget in this upcoming cycle.
Perfect.
Great question.
We also have some questions that get pretty specific about types of equipment that can be purchased, and maybe we'll just run through those quite quickly. The first one is, can we use ERate funds for network security cameras?
No. So those would be end user devices, just like desktop PCs or laptops. End user devices themselves do not qualify for support. However, the basic networking equipment and cabling connecting to those end user devices should all qualify for a discount, not the end user device itself, including security cameras.
All right. And what about an upgrade to a firewall or access points? Does Cat 2 cover those?
Yeah, so firewalls are covered. In most cases, if you take a device away and the network goes down or stops functioning, that's a good litmus test to see if it qualifies for an ERate discount. A firewall is a bit of an exception to that because technically the network still works, at least until bad things start happening to it. But a firewall does qualify for support. The upgrades to equipment, whether or not the equipment was originally purchased with an ERate discount, you are interested in upgrading it. If you are interested in perhaps providing some sort of maintenance type of license, then you can add those to the equipment itself. Again, whether or not it was originally purchased with ERate.
Okay. All right. And I did want to follow up. John, you and I had a conversation a few weeks ago, actually, about the tools, the software tools, the intelligence, the analytics that overlay much of the networking today, and it's actually the heart and soul of these things. And I believe that you were telling me that ERate does not cover these services at the moment. And I'd like to hear from maybe both you and maybe Bob as well, as you look down in your crystal ball going forward, is it likely that these software applications that control the networks, are they going to make it into the ERate list or not?
You're absolutely correct that currently management, security types of appliances, dedicated intrusion detection, and those sorts of things don't qualify for support. And really that reflects sort of a 1998 view of network security, and it was sort of considered like an extra, like a nicety, but really not required. And of course, we all know that today, it's so important, and I'm sure Bob could talk about this. Why is it schools need these tools? My sincere hope is that as the FCC considers what Category 2 will look like in 2020 and how it's administered, that they will take that opportunity to open up the door, if you will, to these other types of security and management tools, understanding that it is all subject to the Category 2 budget system. We also hope that in 2020 we'll have a district-level Category 2 budget. So instead of a site-by-site calculation, you'll have one number for your whole school district, and that is something that Funds for Learning has been actively promoting to the FCC, along with changes to this requirement that network security not be funded.
Okay. Yeah, what I'd like to jump in and say, we do recognize, just as both of you have been saying, how important the network software, the analytics, the software that gives you the insight, the network management, how important that is. And we also recognize that it doesn't qualify under the ERate program, so we've put together special pricing for schools to help schools bring that software on board. And we've got information on that special pricing, basically site licenses, available at our website, our K-12 Solution Center there. So yeah, we recognize the gap that exists.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to come back to you now, John. With someone, Marion is asking about retroactively applying. They're a private school and they just physically moved from one building to another, and they've had to pay for fiber optic lines to be put in and for the new building to be networked. Can they get funding for something that's already happened?
No, the ERate program, it's very much, you can think of it sort of like your taxes. You know, the IRS really cares when you received a paycheck. And if you got it on December 31st versus January 1st, can make all the difference in the world. And for the ERate program, it's administered with a very similar mindset. The time frames during which goods or services are delivered matter. And in this case, if it was done previously, it would not qualify. What I would encourage you, Marion, is that sort of like planting a tree, you know, the best time was 10 years ago, but it's always good to plant a tree today. And I would imagine that there are other opportunities for equipment upgrades on your horizon, and that you can thank yourself now going forward when you utilize these funds, that that you're helping stretch your dollars further, but you can't go back.
Okay. And here's a question that just came in from Roosevelt, John, that I think you're going to be able to answer very easily. Do consultants who support the network infrastructure qualify for ERate?
That is a question, or the answer to that really depends on what type of work you're talking about. If it is support for a network, again, going back to the management aspect, the management monitoring, these types of devices don't qualify for support. So if you are paying a technician, in essence, to kind of manage your network, that would not qualify for support. If they are providing support more on a break-fix basis, the network goes down, we need support, we need someone to come out and help get it back up and running, that can qualify. It's a subcategory under Category 2. It's called basic maintenance, and that type of support, if it's again delivered in the context of break-fix, that would qualify. Also under that category of service, you also see licenses. For example, if you have wireless access points and have licenses, in some cases, those are considered basic maintenance. But the individuals paying for a person really is limited to break-fix maintenance. I would also say that if you have someone helping design a network, that again by itself really doesn't qualify. If that design work, if the cost for designing a network is sort of loaded into a vendor's quote they provide you, that's fine, but you couldn't go out and just procure someone to design a network and get an ERate discount on that. Okay.
All right. Well, we probably have time for one more quick question, and so I'm going to actually combine two questions. The first is, can vocational schools apply for ERate? And then a follow-up from someone else is it available also to charter schools? And I think that will probably be the last question we can take.
Okay, I'll do them in reverse order there. Charter schools, yes. We're talking about K through 12 charter schools. Funds for Learning, we work with hundreds of charter schools nationwide, helping them apply for ERate applications. So the primary thing is understanding if you are a standalone charter or if you are considered part of a school district. You may be listed on the school district application, or you may submit a standalone application. So there are some little caveats about how you submit an application, but the bottom line is ERate dollars are available for K through 12 schools, public and private, charter, not charter, If you're a K-12 school, you can receive E-rate discounts. Now, as it relates to vocational schools, to the extent that a vocational school is serving K-12, a K-12 population, yes, absolutely, they qualify, and the internet access there, the network infrastructure, all of those pieces are available. And while I'm on that topic, there are also juvenile justice centers, detention type centers that oftentimes will have K-12 type functions. Depending upon the state that you're in, those may qualify, as well as pre-K facilities, like Head Start type facilities. Depending upon the state that you're in, they may also qualify for E-rate discounts. And one last point on back on the Category 2 budgets that I really want to point out is it is unknown today if you have a remaining balance, if that will be available to you in 2020. I think the safe bet is that it will not be. Again, because of that change that the FCC is making to Category 2 and the fact that they're going to have to revisit the whole system for 2020, I think that for everyone today listening, I would really encourage them just to not count on balances being available from this current cycle rolling into 2020. If you've got a balance available in 2019, then you really want to make full use of that before we get to the 2020 funding year.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Well, we have run over our time, so we have no more time for questions. If you did ask a question that we did not get to, someone from the Extreme Networks team will follow up to get you an answer. So at the end of all this, I want to thank John Harrington and Bob Nielsen again for really excellent presentations. I also want to thank Extreme Networks again for its support. And one final reminder before we all go, we will be sending out an email to everyone when the recording of the webinar is ready. Thank you, and this concludes today's webinar. Goodbye.